Nestled in a suburban street in Victoria Park, Perth, Western Australia, is one of the world's most innovative rehabilitation centres for people with acquired brain injury. It could be a stroke, a major car accident or fall, or another tragic and unpredictable event which changes your life in an instant. It can happen to any one of us. For those in Western Australia, we have Oats Street, a one-of-a-kind centre which is part of the Brightwater Care Group, and with a care model based on the phenomenon of neuroplasticity, an understanding that the brain can rewire, change and adapt. Brightwater Oats Street is a home away from home set around a series of houses. It's a place where clients are surrounded and supported by expert care to relearn life skills, regain their confidence, and literally take back their lives as they graduate through a phased and focused program. Led by Janet Wagland, Oats Street is a story of serendipity and the courage to have a crack. Janet is my guest today. She's a woman who has defied stereotypes and led her life with passion and persistence to ensure health professionals work together hand in glove for the goals of their clients. In line with the COVID protocols in place when we met up, Janet and I are wearing masks as we chat, but it certainly didn't dampen our conversation. We explored her early career as an occupational therapist and how her OT thinking underpins the revolutionary work at the world-renowned Oats Street Centre. I'm Sonia Nolan, and I hope you'll learn something new as you join us for this smart conversation with heart around My Warm Table. Welcome, Janet, to My Warm Table.
Thank you, Sonia. I'm really happy and pleased to be here.
I would like to understand more about what Brightwater Care Group does as a starting point.
Brightwater Care Group it's a very large organisation, and it's been around since 1901 actually, and it was probably more well known to West Australians in the older days when it was the Homes of Peace. So Brightwater Care Group has always had a place in Perth society as a service for people with more complex needs, people who have had challenges in finding care and support from other environments. And that was originally why it was set up in 1901, to be able to provide a service for people who really had nowhere else to go but had high and complex needs. My understanding is that one of the first clients or residents or patients or whatever they called them in 1901 was a gentleman with neurosyphilis who was in his 40s. So our connection with people with neurological disability, our connection with people who are younger, our connection with people with very complex presentations has been part of Brightwater's DNA since right back to that very first person who came into Brightwater at that stage, or the Homes of Peace.
And it sounds as though, Janet, that in 1901, that was a really innovative approach to care for people. And so that history of innovation seems like it's been in Brightwater's DNA since the very, very beginning, because the centre that you run is one of the most innovative in the world now.
That's correct. Brightwater's always been an organisation that has given innovation an opportunity, and I've been with Brightwater for over 30 years. People would think that's far too long to spend with an organisation, but every time I've thought about what next, something else has come up. There's always been a what next, whether it's a change in role or whether it's a new project. There's always been something challenging, and there's always been a willingness from management and across the board with our staff to listen to new ideas and I guess have a real crack at doing something that's a bit different, which to me has just kept me connected to the organisation.
Yeah, that's really exciting, and it is actually having that opportunity to have a crack at something, like you've said, because you need to give things a go, and sometimes they don't work out, and other times, there's all this incredible possibility that opens up.
And I guess that fits as well with the ethos around rehabilitation, because if we don't have a crack and take a bit of a risk and try something different and fail and learn from that in the way we operate ourselves, how can we possibly expect people who we're supporting to go through rehabilitation related to their brain injury to do exactly that? And that's what we ask them to do, to trust us, to have a go, to try something different, take a little bit of a risk and to learn from the ups and downs of that, what works and what doesn't work.
Janet, can you tell me what acquired brain injury actually is?
I guess it's just what it really says. So an acquired brain injury is something that has impacted on the brain to damage it and to then create change in brain function for the person. So that can be many different things that cause somebody to have an acquired brain injury. So of course people almost automatically think about a traumatic brain injury. So somebody in a car accident who experiences trauma and then gets a brain injury. But we also consider that somebody who's had a stroke, either from a blood clot or from a bleed, that is also an acquired brain injury. But then we have people who have what's called anoxic damage. So maybe somebody's had a near drowning experience, or they've had a heart attack and lost oxygen to the brain. So that can cause an anoxic brain injury. Then there are other just things that happen to the brain, infections, tumours. So other disease that may actually impact on the brain and make changes for the person, and therefore they acquire a brain injury.
Oh, that's so interesting. It's so varied. Absolutely. I wouldn't have thought of that great range that you've just described. I immediately went to head trauma and stroke.
Probably the most common we're seeing at the moment is people with stroke. And over the years that I've been connected with Oats Street, the number of people with stroke have actually grown. So young stroke.
Young stroke, that's interesting. And what is young stroke? Like, how young is young?
Young to us is under 65. So it's a bit of a big catch-all.
Well, it's interesting because from my perspective, in the last 18 months, I've had two very close friends who have had a bleed to the brain or a stroke.
Yeah.
And around the 50-year-old mark, so
yes.
Really young.
It's far more common than what we think, and really it can impact on anybody. So it's not just people who lead bad lifestyles.
Not at all.
It can be just something that happens to someone who's incredibly fit.
Every single case would be very different, wouldn't they?
They certainly are. The brain is a very complex beast. We really have to think, what makes us who we are, what makes us function the way we do. It's the brain. So the brain has potential to cause all kinds of issues for people, and even simple brain injuries can actually have quite profound impact on somebody's life, because it can change their personality, it can change their skill base, it can change the ability that they have to connect different functions together to make them less functional. For some people, sometimes the changes can actually be ones that may show them a whole new skill base. And so it's not necessarily that all people with brain injury find that their journey is one where they have a worse impact. We have people as well who find that they're in fact grateful that they've had the brain injury. Not many, but occasionally, because of those changes. And that's how complex it is. You can't always assume. You just have to go with the person and understand what's important to them.
And I think that underpins all of the philosophy of the place that you run. So tell us about the Oats Street Centre.
So Oats Street's an interesting journey in itself. It's had a serendipitous journey from the very beginning, that we'd lost a more long-stay rehabilitation centre in the closure of Melville Rehab many years ago. So many people who'd gone through the old Shenton Park State Rehab Service would be discharged and then go on to go to Melville Rehab for further care and support and engagement in vocational rehab and so forth. When Melville closed down, of course, their families and the people themselves were very angry. There was nothing really left. Like all good stories, it begins at an election time, so
coincidentally,
good time to be lobbying for things. And the state government approached our then Chief Executive Officer, Penny Flett, and asked her to look at some private hospitals to see which of them would be suitable for a brain injury rehab service, a slow stream rehab service. Penny had a look around. The old Oats Street private hospital, which I'm told by many people I was born there or I was there for minor surgery.
And that's in Victoria Park,
It is
right?
in Victoria Park, so many people have had connections with Oats Street.
Sure.
She went and had a look at it. She looked at a few of the other private hospitals. She told the government that Oats Street was the least likely to do what she wanted it to do, and they said, would you like it? Basically.
Even though it's not fit for purpose, do you want it anyway?
That's right. So basically, we took that on with some funding to do some renovations, created 3 8-bed houses. It had a lot of outbuildings, sheds and other small houses. They also then put in some gardens, got rid of some of the car park area. And Penny was very insistent at that stage that it be like home, that the staff all worked together to support people in the rehabilitation, and that they didn't wear uniforms, that it was just very much directed by the clients, and it was to have that very domestic scale, home-like feel. It was then that the beginning of, I guess, Oats Street having that multidisciplinary type of team, the beginnings of it having that feel that it needed to be domestic scale so people could learn new skills or relearn old skills.
And these are skills like everyday life skills?
Yes, very much about everyday life skills.
So things like washing dishes and making your bed or showering,
combing your hair.
Care. Yeah, right.
And then progressing on to skills like being able to go shopping, being able to cross the road. So it also has always been very much part of the Vic Park community. It's located next to Swansea Street Markets. So often for the clients then and the clients now, Swansea Street Markets is their first venture out into the community. They have to learn to negotiate the car park, which is challenging for all of us because there's a lot of comings and goings there.
And that's by that they're walking to the
That's
markets,
right.
Yes.
So walking there or wheeling there, being able to order what they want, whether it's a roll or buying fruit or buying meat, that all happens down at the market. So for many people, that's their first foray back into the community. So we have that connection, and then they broaden out into the greater community with public transport, the local TAFE, the trains, the other shopping centres.
And there's a graduation program among the way that Oats Street is coordinated now. Is that right, Janet, that you've got different houses and people graduate from one house to another?
That's correct. Would you like the story of how we ended up with that?
I would love the story, because I do remember that, again, there was serendipity involved here. It wasn't exactly what you had planned in the first place.
It very definitely wasn't. It was part of our learning as well by trying something different.
Having a crack.
Yeah, having a crack, definitely. Yeah. So when I became the care manager at Oats Street, which was a long time ago, so once I've told you I've been here 30 years, so that was actually in 2002. We had a number of clients on the site who had become a bit stuck. So they'd been there for a number of years. They weren't moving on. They were very good at teaching new people things that we didn't necessarily want them to be learning. And because they were with them 24/7 and we weren't. So even though it's a 24/7 service, there's staff turnover, but they're consistent in their life are the other people that are living there.
Sure. There is something that says the 5 people that you spend the most time with are the people that you actually become. So you have to choose those 5 people really, really carefully in life. I say that to my children all the time, but it's interesting that that's sort of even playing out by what you're describing here.
It very much played out. We needed to support those people to move on to the next step in their lives and their journey, because we couldn't be in their lives forever. We weren't a permanent accommodation service. We were a rehab service, and we needed to have those beds to provide new opportunities for other people coming from the health system and even from the community. And we also had to look at this problem of learning new tricks, I guess, that we didn't want people to learn. The staff and I got together and thought, well, how are we going to solve this problem? And we thought, well, if we actually move all of the people into that have been here for a long time into the end house, which was nearest the car park, then we can call that the discharge house. And so that's what we did. We moved them into the end house. We told everybody this was now the discharge house. And much to our amazement, people started moving out. So they really did discharge and move on with their lives.
Language is so powerful, isn't it?
Yes, yeah. It was because I guess it was very clear that that's what our expectations were, and maybe we hadn't been clear enough before, but we certainly were by doing that.
And how many houses were there at that point?
There were 3.
3 houses. This was the third house, the end house, and that was then the discharge house.
That's right. And I think it was even clearer because it was near the car park. So it was very, very much about away you go.
That's right. We have the vehicle to take you from the premises.
That's the one. So then the first house, we thought, well, that's where all the new admissions should come into. So that meant that we had all of the new people all together, which meant they were learning more of us and from each other rather than learning from people who were teaching them tricks that we didn't want them to learn. And people who were more midway through their journey moved to the second house. So then, of course, we got to the stage where the new people were no longer new people. And the therapists and the nurses and the care workers started saying, so what do we need now? How do we know when somebody is no longer new and move on to the next stage? So moving on to the next stage was then about what have they achieved? So what criteria do they need to meet for us to then allow them to then move on and I guess graduate?
Yes.
The amazing staff that we had put together some graduation criteria which very clearly articulated to people what physically they needed to be able to do, what skills like showering, dressing, and also other skills like being able to plan their day, being able to manage their money, being able to start to access the community independently. So all those skills got built into a graduation structure, and we were then able to very clearly articulate to people what they needed to do to move to the next house.
And everyone needs goals, don't they? To be really clear about what it is they need to do in order to move forward. So, there's just some very clever psychology in that.
That's right. And we had a structure as well of having this multidisciplinary team, which we then really worked hard to make them, I guess, more interdisciplinary. And to me, the definition between the two is the multidisciplinary team is much more a number of health professionals all working alongside of each other, whereas the interdisciplinary team is much more them actually working connectedly around around the goals that they're trying to achieve with the clients. So we'd moved to a structure very much about client-directed goals.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if we had someone called Sam and he wanted to go to TAFE and he wanted to do that by public transport, to be able to achieve that skill was something that needed to be contributed to by everybody in the team. The physios to help him be able to travel on a moving vehicle and to walk to the station in the first place. The OTs about wayfinding and which train to catch. The speech pathologists about how he purchased his ticket and being able to communicate that. Be able to socially communicate and be aware of all the social cues of everybody else on the train. So all of that team needed to work together to achieve that outcome with Sam. So not only did we have this strong sort of graduation criteria structure, we also had a strong outcome-based goal structure that was very much wrapped around the client's goals and the directions they were heading in. So the clients have always known from that point as to what it is they need to achieve to keep moving forward. So that enabled us to then support people to move from one house to the next house to the next house and then ultimately back out into the community.
And that journey normally takes how long? I guess it's dependent on the person, but what sort of time frame do people stay at Oats Street?
In that old form, we would probably see people for about 12 months before they would move on and out. Now the journey's a bit more complicated because we've got a much bigger site. Time that people are with us for is very much dependent on the complexity of their brain injury, their recovery rate, and also their social supports that are around them, the parts of their brain that are impacted. It's quite a complex journey, and for everyone it's different, and it's really important that we recognise that difference.
And how many graduates have you had from Oats Street?
Oh, gee, that would be as long as a piece of string. But there would be hundreds who have been through.
What's really interesting in what you've just described a moment ago, Janet, is this wraparound service, the speech pathologist working with the occupational therapist, working with the physiotherapist. And that to me just sounds like what exactly should happen. And yet I know when we spoke sometime earlier, a few weeks ago, you were saying to me that's not always what happens in a clinical setting, that you don't always have all of those professional allied health professionals really communicating and understanding the goal and all working in their own, mutually respectful ways to help achieve that goal. So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because that's staggering to me that isn't normal.
Yeah, it's an interesting sort of quirk, I guess, of the health professions. And we tend to, if you consider hospitals, for instance, we tend to have the physio department and the OT department and the speech pathology department. And, certainly they have teams that are, allocated to each of the wards and the units, but they don't necessarily also always work together on singular client goals. They're often working on what they need to achieve as an individual therapist. The nurses, the same, will be working on what they need to do from a health management point of view with the person. So even the teaching of therapists and nurses tends to be very much based on the disciplines. And there has been attempts to do some interdisciplinary type practices where, you send a group of multiple different types of therapists to work together on their pracs as students. But it's not common. It's not something that's really totally been rolled out in the training of all those therapists, so it's not natural, and they can tend to work a little bit in silos, which is a shame, because often it's that connection of the skills that really leads to a better outcome for people. When they're not working together, you can sometimes lose the purpose for the client. So are we just working on a splinter skill or a primary skill, or for instance, a primary skill such as walking? So if we can teach someone how to walk, but they actually have poor ability to cross the road, we can actually be making them more dangerous by not actually connecting the two skills together.
Of course, yeah. So in that case, you'd have the physiotherapist and the occupational therapist working together for that full skill.
That's right. So and then why are they crossing the road? I guess it's a bit like the chicken, isn't it? Why did it cross the road?
Yeah.
Because if you don't have a reason why, then in fact by teaching someone to cross the road, then you can further compound the issue by them not knowing where they're going, getting lost in the community, going places where they really shouldn't be, and not actually having any purpose to what they're doing.
So then you need that communication element, which brings in your speech pathologist as well. I guess I'm just sort of trying to join the dots myself in this way. Yeah,
that's right.
And so now are there 8 houses at Oats Street?
Yes, so Oats Street has 8 houses, and it also has 8 independent living units. We've just recently purchased 3 houses that are adjacent to the service. But then we have to start doing some consultation and consideration about ultimately what do we do with that extra land that's connected to it. Do we build more of the same, or do we build some stuff that really complements what we're already doing on the site and can offer a broader service to more people?
Yeah, and I guess do you take a step back and look at what's the next level of innovation for the organisation?
Certainly, because really, life has changed enormously for all of us, not only with COVID, but for me in the space that I work in, with the introduction of the NDIS and how it operates and its interconnection or sometimes clunky connection with the health system. So how do we actually create services that provide better outcomes for people in all of those spaces, and how do we be innovative to come up with something that's a little bit different that really meets the gaps that we're now seeing?
Janet, we've talked about how innovative Oats Street is. You've had interest from all over the world about what you're doing here, is that right?
Well, we have, and I think people are a little bit dubious when we describe ourselves here in little old Perth as having this innovative community-based brain injury rehabilitation service, and they think, yeah, we do a bit of community rehab, but then when they actually come out and see it, they're very interested.
So it hasn't been replicated anywhere else in the world at this point?
No, it hasn't. It's been described, so we've described the model, of course, in its entirety, but I think it's just because we came up with this model in that serendipitous way with that graduated process that people take a while to get their head around it, even being able to describe a domestic scale environment, often for people who are used to delivering rehab in a hospital that don't quite get it.
I know that you have a very well sought after student placement program at Oats Street because there are these young up and coming OTs and speechies and physios and psychologists all wanting to actually learn how to be part of that sort of team.
Yes, and we've got close relationships with the unis because of that. It's a different placement to them going to a hospital or even to a community environment. It's something that actually teaches a lot of skills about working together, which is really important, as we've just talked about. But it's also an environment that for many of the therapists, particularly the occupational therapists, it really embodies everything that they see their career as being about. It has the complexity of working with people with neurological disability, which is not always everyone's thing because it is a complex space, but it's also a really rewarding space. And for many of those young students coming through, when they can see the outcomes they can achieve with somebody who has complex brain injury, it sort of tips them a bit into thinking, yeah, maybe this is what I'd like to be doing for the rest of my career. And that's really important that we can offer that.
Your background is occupational therapy, is that right, Janet?
Yes.
So take us back to, your early days and your early career.
I fell into it, so serendipity again.
Yes.
I actually wanted to do speech pathology because my mother actually was a school teacher who used to do some prac teaching or locum teaching for one of the local, it was called the St George Crippled Children's School. So it was a school for children that had cerebral palsy, muscular dystrophy and other complex disability. And I would meet her there after school sometimes on my way home, and I got to know some of the kids. And as I got a bit older, I thought, yeah, I'd really like to work in this, and I was quite attracted to speech pathology. So I put that down as one of my preferences, did my exams, didn't do any study.
You know that they go hand in hand, don't you?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I kind of learnt that. Came out the other end, did get enough marks to go into occupational therapy, which I wasn't really sure what it was. What is this strange beast of a profession? I think a lot of people
still are a bit unsure about OT. They're not really sure what they do, but it's incredible what OTs do.
Yeah, very interesting. And when I got into it, then of course I started to understand what we provided as an occupational therapist. And one of my first student placements, the first student placement, I actually went to St Vincent's Hospital, which is in Darlinghurst in Sydney, and did my very first home visit, which is a function of occupational therapists, down at King's Cross, which was a real eye-opener.
I'll bet.
It was a make-or-break kind of experience. So I learnt very early on what occupational therapy was all about and how complex it could be, yes, and how very much it's a profession about the whole of the person's life. And the rewards that you get from enabling people to take back that life. So I thought, yeah, this is actually the thing for me, and it's taught me a lot, not only about working with individuals, but also about guiding programs so that they're actually more suited to a larger group of individuals to achieve better outcomes.
Yeah, and I think it takes a really special kind of person to be an occupational therapist.
Yeah, I'd agree.
We're not biased.
I'm a bit biased.
I think we're both a bit biased, but I do think that, the work that the occupational therapists do, it really is taking back people's lives. As you've said, it's important. And that brings us right back to Oats Street, and the work that you do there is really taking people's lives back for them.
It certainly is, and that ability from the occupational therapist to be able to value the other disciplines and be able to work with them as well to pull them into helping out, And I often used to find as a young therapist that I was quite a pest because I always thought I should be in the physio department when somebody was up on the tilt table. Why wouldn't I be doing my hand therapy or whatever I was doing with the client at the time while they were actually with the physio? Why wouldn't I get the physio or the speechy to help out when I needed a hand with somebody? So I've never ever thought of occupational therapy as a sole profession. I've seen it as being part of a team and thought that that's how everybody worked and got a bit of a surprise on a few occasions. But But in my head, that's how I should be working. And it's enabled me to be able to translate that into the environments that I've been connected with, in particular Oats Street, which has been really rewarding, because to me, Oats Street and the way that highly skilled group of staff work together really, for me, emphasises that is the way to work, that we are a team and we all have different things to bring to the team, and the centre of the team needs to be the client who's directing what they want, not what we want.
So clearly over the years you will have seen that discipline change and grow, and I'd love to have your reflections on how occupational therapy has changed over these many years.
Oh, hugely. I mean, even when I started my occupational therapy training in the 70s, there was still that kind of thinking and talk that, occupational therapy, they were the basket weavers, we did leather work, we did that kind of stuff with people.
Right.
That's what it was about. And I think that had come a bit from the war years, where that word occupation was very much about, so somebody's got a disability now, so how do we occupy them?
Keep them occupied.
Yeah,
right.
so a bit of good basket weaving.
Yeah, that's right, fair enough.
Now, I never learnt to basket weave.
So it's not a skill you have?
No, and even the leather work I wasn't that good at. I wasn't too bad with the masonry drill, which to me that was a far more practical tool of trade.
Yeah. So is that what you actually learnt at university?
I did learn how to use a masonry drill.
But did you learn the basket weaving?
No.
And that? No, that's right. Good, I'm just clarifying that.
But I did actually do a couple of pracs as a student, practical placements, where they were still doing a bit of origami and basket weaving and pottery, and certainly, those things are all great, because
There's
people
a place
need
for that.
That's right, but it shouldn't be the whole of somebody's life. It's part of their life and part of their life interests. And really, if you translate occupational therapy into being that, what is it that's important to the person? What new skills can they learn? What new interests can they have? And those things may be part of that, but it can't be that it defines who they are totally. And it also can't be defining what the profession's about, because it's not. It's about the whole of the person and their lifestyle and them moving forward. When I first did occupational therapy, I think it was in the second year where it had become a science degree. Prior to that, it was a diploma. And that was a whole new thing, because it meant we learned about things like anatomy and neuroanatomy and physiology and a bit of chemistry, so it became much more science-based.
A bit more robust, maybe, in the way that it was being thought through.
Yes. So it had lost that thing that nice girls did. In my year group, there was still a number of girls who'd come in because the school that they came from and their parents had encouraged them to do it, because it was a nice thing to do, prior to them getting married and having children. So it's a bit of that stuff we talked about earlier.
Still going on, yes.
Yeah, and then when they got there, they found it actually really wasn't like that anymore. It was much more about getting your hands dirty in the hospital and supporting people to learn, standing in a shower and being covered in talcum powder while you're trying to teach somebody how to shower and dress themselves.
Sure.
And taking people, out into the community in a wheelchair, doing home visits in King's Cross, all of those things.
Not what nice girls are supposed to do.
No, that was not what nice girls did at all. So it's really evolved a lot, and I think over the years it's also evolved into different spaces. So it's moved from being something that was traditionally much more around hospitals to something that also does a lot of work in the community. There's been much more input of occupational therapy into school systems, into spaces with children with disabilities, I guess into things like prisons, any area of life basically. So I think it's become a profession that has found more spaces to work in and found that it can actually produce good outcomes in all of those many spaces. Vocational rehab, that's another area that there's a lot more occupational therapists in. I think it's also a profession that, for me personally, has really got a number of factors that set you up for being able to do management. A lot of the skills I learned as an occupational therapist, that whole ability to analyse what's happening for somebody and how do you problem solve and put other measures in place. That's a skill that you really need as a manager as well. So it's taught me a lot of things that I use in management.
Yeah, I guess there's such an underlying emotional intelligence that is embedded in an occupational therapist's everyday role, isn't there? And that skill and that emotional intelligence has to be something that managers carry forward.
Yes, exactly, and that understanding of the people that you're working with across the board, and that everybody's a bit different, and for all of the staff that we're working with, there's different meanings in why they're actually doing what they're doing. So, and for good or for bad,
Yeah. So there's an empathy in there as well. There's all of those skills that, look, I get so angry when people call them soft skills. I get really grumpy about it, because they are the critical skills of what we need to work together as people.
That's right. And then when you then start to think about service development, which has enabled us to do a lot of our innovation, what is it that I could do with a service that actually creates a better impact for a larger number of people? How do I change this so I'm creating better outcomes for more people with disability or with mental health issues, or whatever the target group is that we're working with? So it's a career that has supported me to think more broadly, to see things from a different angle, so not just always look at it from the same perspective, take a different view on things, because often you have to understand the person's view, and everybody's view is not the same. So how do I actually adapt my mind to understand why they would be thinking in that way, which then, by learning to do that, also makes me think in different ways about different problems.
So I'd like to take us back, Janet, to your early life. I know we talked a bit about your early career, but going back to your early life, would you have imagined that this is the work and life you would be leading now when you were gathered around your table with your family at home growing up?
I was always the out there child, so the challenging person in the family. I think it's the middle child syndrome,
that's what it is, middle child syndrome.
I was really lucky so Mum was a school teacher, and Dad was a toolmaker who ended up banding together with my mother's father and her brother to set up their own business. But Dad had come from a fairly difficult socioeconomic background, but had a mother who I didn't ever meet that grandmother, but she apparently was a pretty amazing lady who was quite artistic, was good at sewing, which I'm not, was good at music, so quite a talented person. And I think that gave him an understanding that women could do anything. And I guess the biggest thing that I took from my childhood as I was growing up and going through high school was that there was never anything that I wanted to do that I wouldn't be able to do. And that was never even something that I consciously thought about. It was just an understood. So when I wanted to do a therapy, I didn't, there was never any kind of challenge about what you want to do, or girls should just go off and, do nursing or do teaching or do something. Whatever we wanted to do, my sister and I, we were encouraged to do that, and my brother, of course, as well. But I had a father who very much supported me to do whatever I wanted, and Mum, of course, well and truly in that corner that, women could do what they wanted to do. So I had a strange sport that I took on as well. I became a competition rifle shooter.
Oh, did you?
Yeah.
Oh, tell me about that.
Unusual for women.
Yeah, it is. And is that something you still do, Janet?
Not so much now. It's taken me all over the world, actually, rifle shooting. So our competition rifle shooting was being able to shoot over long distance with a single shot rifle. So long distances as in 1,000 yards.
Yes, fair distance.
Yeah, so my grandfather, my mother's father, was a competition rifle shooter who shot for New South Wales and also for Australia, and he also did something that's called weather coaching. So, of course, when you're shooting over long distances, you have to be able to read changes in the weather because of the impact it has on the bullet, the wind.
Yes.
So he was really skillful at that. So at about 13, I thought, yeah, this is something I wanted to do. He was in his 60s, so he must have thought, oh, my goodness, suddenly inherited this 13-year-old who's going to come down to an environment that were all blokes. There were very few ladies on rifle range. There was the odd ones. They were usually pretty tough. But, yeah, I got into rifle shooting and my husband I met through rifle shooting, and we've travelled the world, and I did some wind coaching as well. I've coached for Australia and for Western Australia and I've shot for Western Australia, so it's been a really interesting journey. Certainly, just like my career, at never any point in time did I think this is just something that blokes do or it's something I can't do. It was something I could do.
You could do, and you had an interest and passion and you just went for it.
Yeah, that's right. But it's a good sport for learning to focus, learning to understand the weather, of course, and the conditions that you're working in, and understanding of people when you're actually coaching a team of shooters, so reading the weather for them while they shoot. And making changes with those weather changes. You also have to understand the person that you're working with and be able to detect from changes from their shot patterns that they're a bit stressed or what their common manifestation of getting a bit anxious during their shooting is. And so a bit of that understanding people also connected so it gave me that connection between my career and my sport.
There's so many skills and life skills just within that with what you've just described.
And huge opportunities to be able to use them. So I've been very lucky.
I've been so interested in hearing your story today, Janet. I thank you so much for your time. I really do appreciate you letting me have a little window into what happens at Oats Street and your journey in getting there and that wonderful understanding of what an occupational therapist does in the world. So thank you so much for your time today. And that innovation, Janet, and having a crack is what I'm going to be taking away from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
You've been listening to My Warm Table with Sonia Nolan. In Italian, a tavola calda is a warm and welcoming table where you can share big ideas, friendship, laughter and life. So much happens around the kitchen table, and I wanted to amplify it here in this podcast. My aim is to feed your mind and soul through smart conversations with heart. No topic is off limits, but good table manners rule. I hope you'll join us each week as we set the table for my extraordinary guests who will let you feast on their deep knowledge, life experiences, and wise insights. Let's keep the conversation flowing. Please subscribe to the My Warm Table podcast and share it with your friends and networks. Perhaps if they're new to podcasting, take a moment to show them how to download and subscribe so they don't miss an episode either. I'd also love you to join our community on Facebook. You'll find the group at My Warm Table Podcast. Your support is very much appreciated so that together we can eat, think and be merry.